Hello and good afternoon friends, welcome to the CCE EduSet live lecture. Dear friends, with our ongoing series on Indian political thoughts, today we would be talking on the political thoughts of Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. And for this discussion, we have once again with us in our studios Dr. Satish Kumar Jha. Dr. Satish Kumar Jha is Associate Professor in Aryabhatta College, University of Delhi. Dr. Jha has immense experience. He continuously and constantly interacts with the students so that he could share maximum knowledge with them, and with the help of these EduSet lectures also he is continuously disseminating information. So let's welcome our guest Dr. Satish Kumar Jha, and let's try to grab maximum knowledge through him on the political thought of Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. Hello sir, welcome to the EduSet lecture.
Thank you Geetika ji, and good afternoon. Today's lecture we are going to devote on the political thought of B.R. Ambedkar, Bhimrao Ambedkar. In fact, one of the leading minds of modern India. One can say that one of the finest product of the modern education and modern sensibility and modern consciousness. Ambedkar's political thought is basically plagued with a number of things, including the kind of neglect and kind of marginalization he suffered in social science, in political science, and in different branches of humanities over the years. But importantly, in recent decades, recent years, we have seen that it has made a very significant comeback. In the sense that no discussion of Indian political thought is considered to be complete without a reference to Ambedkar's ideas on society, Ambedkar's idea on polity, and Ambedkar's idea on emancipation and liberation. So that is quite significant here. Now B.R. Ambedkar, in fact, one should be clear at the very outset that provided a kind of thinking and thought on the emancipation of the oppressed sections in society. He basically worked for the freedom and liberation of basically the underprivileged and those who were basically subjected to oppression. And therefore Ambedkar's political thought, what had happened, that was brought on the center stage of political discourse as a result of a powerful movement among people in the society, and the social science had to respond to that movement, that quest and that churning which was taking place continuously. And therefore Ambedkar's inclusion in the entire discourse on modern Indian political thinking can be attributed to his place in the hearts and the minds of the people, or other people's quest for emancipation, and their basically kind of engagement with Ambedkar's thought. So this is how we find that in spite of the neglect and the initial ignorance about his ideas, his thought, in fact now he is integral to modern Indian political thinking, political thought. Now the thing is that like any other thinker, Ambedkar's ideas also one can see in process of evolution. It was evolving, and he was a person who was continuously engaged in various struggles in society for freedom, liberation and emancipation, for respect and dignity. Therefore that evolution was closely associated, integrally associated with the struggles of the people, and therefore we find that there are different stages in this evolution. So we will basically touch upon those phases and those evolution. Now one thing is important to remember, that at times Ambedkar's entire political thought is either reduced to his role as a constitution maker, as the chairman of the drafting committee, or it is basically sometimes seen only as a champion of the cause of scheduled castes, particularly those sections who were basically suffering on account of the untouchability and caste discrimination, and therefore are representative of the scheduled caste sections in society. But I think both perspectives are fallacies. It is true that Ambedkar played very important and significant role in the making of the constitution as a chairman of the drafting committee. In fact, if one goes through the debates of the Constituent Assembly, one can see the kind of stellar role he played in piloting the draft constitution through the assembly. In fact, his interventions on number of issues was so illuminating and enlightening that it was acknowledged at the end of the proceedings of the Constituent Assembly by the President of the Chairman of the Constituent Assembly, Rajendra Prasad, that this Assembly could not have done a better thing than electing him as the Chairman of the Drafting Committee. So there is no running away or denying this fact that he played a very important role in the framing of the Constitution. So much so that at times he is referred as modern Manu. In fact, the kind of document of laws which he provided, similar to what in the traditional framework or the earlier in India was associated with Manu and his Shastras, which of course he offered a very trenchant critique, so much so that he and his followers also burned the copy of Manu because for legitimizing an iniquitous and inegalitarian social order based on the caste system. So he is often referred as modern Manu in the sense that the modern constitution is now the document of laws and he is the architect of that document. So this way one can see his role in constitution making. The second thing, as a representative of the scheduled castes or basically as icon of the Dalits, reducing him to that and not as the universal emancipator or not recognizing or acknowledging the tenets of emancipation and liberation, of universal discourse of freedom, which normally is attributed to many thinkers like Gandhi and others, is also to some extent erroneous. Because if you look at Ambedkar's political thought, then of course there is a pattern of evolution. Of course it started with his immediate context, and the context was of course the oppression and subjection, exploitation of the Dalit communities, that which was known as depressed classes, which he called depressed classes, which later on became the scheduled caste after the Government of India Act 1935, because they were scheduled for certain benefits of the government and therefore the scheduled caste. And he championed their cause because he came from that section and he realized, understood, experienced the operation of that section. So he had the first hand experience of operation. So therefore his entire thought evolved from that context. From particular it moved towards the universal. And that's why we'll look at the political parties he's founded. With the Labour Party to Scheduled Caste Federation to Republican Party. That how it was evolving from particular to universal, from one context to a larger context of emancipation. So therefore it started as a crusade, as a struggle, as a campaign for eradication of untouchability and for protection and empowerment of the oppressed sections, particularly the scheduled caste, with which the community in which he was born. But gradually his entire discourse moved in direction of a citizenship discourse, where human beings should be allowed to live a life of a citizen with all entitlements, a multifaceted discourse on citizenship. This is how he perhaps looked at the constitution, and therefore when he engaged with the constitution making process, he perhaps believed that only through law, only through a constitutional method, that this emancipation could be possible in India, a society which was basically ridden with lot of inequalities, a society which was characterized by the kind of inequality which was basically unparalleled in history, and therefore he thought that this constitution will herald a kind of revolution here. So therefore he pinned his entire hope on the constitutional change, on reforms, on the legal means for bringing about change. We will basically also look at these issues at the end. What I am basically trying to point out, that these two extremes, either reducing him as a maker of constitution or reducing him as the voice and representative of the scheduled caste, in between we miss out lot of things, nuances of his political thought. And therefore the first issue which basically comes in context of all thinkers, that how to interpret a thinker basically becomes, in case of Ambedkar, a little more problematic, how to interpret his thought. On the one hand, it was ignored for long. On the other hand, there are many nuances, many dimensions in course of the evolution of his thought, which have to be studied very closely. And therefore, in fact, we have to be careful while interpreting his political thought. Now, if you look at Ambedkar's phases, the different phases, of this evolution, this entire trajectory of his political thought, we notice 2-3 important stages through which it evolved. In fact, that is also quite significant. The first phase, in this evolution, is the phase of struggles and movements. In fact, a highly educated person, as I mentioned in the very beginning, one of the finest product of modern education in India. In fact, he comes back to India after attaining higher studies in United States of America and England, and then indulges in struggles and movements, particularly in context of colonialism and caste system which was prevalent here. In fact, colonialism had its own framework to deal with the caste system, and therefore, initial stages we find that Ambedkar's entire struggle was to attain the status of a minority, particularly for the scheduled caste or depressed classes, because British colonial rule in India recognized only category for kind of entitlements or for state support. That was a minority category. That is a different context altogether why it became a legitimate category for the colonial discourse, because it originated in Europe and basically it came from Europe to India, and therefore even the sections like the oppressed sections like depressed classes who were today called Dalits, they were also basically struggling to get this status of minority in order to get recognition for state benefits. So this is how Ambedkar engaged with it. Now the thing is that this process continued, this struggle and movement, getting the status of minority, recognition as a minority by the colonial state, and it continued both as a member of the Bombay legislature, continued as in the round table conferences, the 3 conferences from 1930 to 32, 30, 31 and 32. Particularly 31 becomes significant because he had a kind of exchange or one can say the debate or the dialogue or a face-off with Gandhi, particularly in the minority committee. So therefore, in the round table conference it continues. And finally, as a Labour member in Viceroy's Executive Council in 1942, when he got for the first time an opportunity to basically bring into action or to basically translate into action or operationalize some of the knowledge he has gained as a student of economics in Columbia. In fact, one of the important dimensions of his political, his educational, background is that he wrote a very, his first-rate thesis on the problem of rupee. So only as a law minister, when he was inducted in the Viceroy's Executive Council, that he could make use of his knowledge and study of economics, because later on he was member of India's first cabinet after independence, that was Jawaharlal Nehru's cabinet. Nehru was the prime minister, but in that cabinet he became a law minister, not a labor minister, not a minister, or not a finance minister. So therefore, in Viceroy's Executive Council, one can see that as a labor minister, he is trying to operationalize some of his skills as of an economist. The second phase, after these struggles and movements, and this struggles and movement is basically spread over a long period of time, from the Mahad Satyagraha, which will be discussed later, to number of struggles which he indulged in, participated actively, to the movement, through parties and otherwise, which he launched for getting recognition as oppressed sections and as a target for the benefits of the colonial state. The second stage in this evolution comes with his membership of the Constituent Assembly. He is elected from Bengal, but he lost membership after the partition of the country, and then again he gets re-elected from Maharashtra, and then this period in his life is also quite significant, particularly the period which he spent in the Constituent Assembly, because later on the Constituent Assembly elected him as the chairman of the drafting committee, one of the most important committee which was tasked with the job to draft the Constitution of India. Now, during this period, he also, 1947, he becomes the law minister of India's first cabinet, as I mentioned earlier, and then this process continues. This stage continues till 1951 when he basically resigns from Nehru's cabinet. Of course, there is a different context of that resignation. If we get the time, we will also discuss it, because many people argue, many scholars argue that it was because of the dithering of the Congress on Hindu Code Bill that he felt disenchanted, and therefore he decided to resign. So therefore, he was a member of the first cabinet, which was not a Congress cabinet, but one can say a national government which comprised of people from different ideologies, different groups and different movements. The third stage in this evolution is also very important, and perhaps the least researched and least studied stage in his political evolution of his political thought. This is from 1951 to 1956. This is the period when he resigns from the cabinet. Then he basically contests election, loses election, again contests the by-election, he also loses the by-election, then goes to the Rajya Sabha and played important role in the proceedings of the Rajya Sabha. During this period, he also wrote a book on the formation of the linguistic states, and the most significant thing happening in this stage is his conversion to Buddhism. In fact, not only he converted to Buddhism, but basically he started critiquing parliamentary democracy also, a kind of criticism which was not seen earlier, because he was a great votary, great supporter of the parliamentary form of government, particularly the two important speeches which delivered on the floor of the Constituent Assembly. One in 1948 when he presented the draft constitution before the assembly, and the second when he was winding up the debate in 1949. These two speeches are very significant. In the first speech, one finds that he elaborates in detail about the entire institutional arrangements which were prescribed in the constitution, and there he makes a comparison between the presidential and parliamentary form of government, the virtues and vices of the both, and then he points out that the parliamentary form of government is a government which stands for accountability and responsibility, whereas the presidential form of government stands for stability. And while going for parliamentary form of government, India has opted for accountability and responsibility more than perhaps the stability. So therefore, he was a great admirer of parliamentary form of government. But gradually we find that toward the fag end of his life, he started showing his reservation on the viability of this mode for emancipation, liberation, self-realization and attainment of selfhood in democracy through this path. So therefore, critique of parliamentary democracy. And not only parliamentary democracy, of course he was a great modernist, believer in reason, science, modern sensibility and philosophy, but many researchers are pointing out that towards the end his take on modernity became little different. So much so that many people argue, many scholars argue that it can be seen as a kind of rebel, a modernist. He was a modernist rebel against modernity at the end of his life. So in fact his take on modernity also changes. So these are the three different stages, and we will be looking at all these three stages in course of our discussion. Now coming to his life, this is very significant. Born in 1891 and he died in 1956. In fact, 1891 he was born and 1956 he died. In fact, he was born at a place called Mahu in Madhya Pradesh. In fact, he was born in a caste which was Mahar caste, oppressed section of the society in terms of the caste structure and caste hierarchy. His father, of course, was working in the army, in a school as a teacher, and therefore, in fact, he didn't have his initial upbringing in the villages. Rather, he was born and brought up in the ambience of a city. Later on, his family moved to Bombay, and therefore he was exposed to the larger surroundings of a big city like Bombay. So this is how we find that this is how the initial life of Ambedkar was shaped. Now, his birth in 1891, interestingly, coincided with two developments, and that is also significant. The first development is that the British government in 1891 cancelled Mahars army recruitment, because the Mahars were one caste who were joining army in large number. But 1891, it was cancelled. Later on, of course, it was again permitted. And the second development was that in particularly Maharashtra, there was an increasing awareness about this practice of untouchability within Hinduism. And particularly many social reformers like Ranade, B.D. Bhandarkar, Agarkar, and other reformists, including the great Jyotiba Phule and his Saptashodhak Samaj, who influenced and inspired Ambedkar immensely in the formation of his thought and his understanding of Indian society and the caste system. So these new sensibility, new awareness was growing in Maharashtra, largely on account of social reform movement which was going on. So therefore, in fact, one finds that these two developments coincided around the same time when he was born. And later on we find that he was inspired by the Maharaja of Baroda and Kolhapur, who helped him to get his education, higher education, because initially he was graduated from the Elphinstone College, Bombay, but it was largely due to the support given by the Maharaja of Baroda and Kolhapur that he went to United States of America, Columbia University in New York, to get his PhD. From Columbia, in fact, we find that Gaikwad of Baroda sent him to he sent him to London School of Economics to get his DSc, and also from London he attained his law degree, particularly from the Gray's Inn. So therefore, in fact, one can say that these two people were of great help. One was the Maharaja of Baroda, who sent him to Columbia, and another was this Chhatrapat Sahu Maharaj of Kolhapur, who sent him to London School of Economics. So due to this two support which he received from two progressive minded Maharajas, and kind of philanthropic work which they did, basically enabled him to go abroad even after coming from such a modest background for his higher learning. Now, of course, Ambedkar returns to India in 1923, but on his return is a different Ambedkar, a confident Ambedkar, a full faith in reform and modern education, and of course, fully committed in the parliamentary democracy, of course, a flexible parliamentary democracy, because he believed that parliamentary democracy has to adapt itself to the changing situation or the different contexts of different societies. So this is how he comes back to India in 1923, well educated, well versed in the modern education, modern knowledge system, and also exposed to the worldview, a different worldview, a more liberative and emancipatory worldview. Now, of course, so far as the influences on influences on Ambedkar is concerned, there have been number of influences. As I mentioned, that Jyotiba Phule was also a big influence on him. But three important influences can be noticed here. One was the influence of liberal democratic thought, or one can say liberalism, particularly values of freedom, equality, dignity, justice, and so on and so forth, and which he basically attained through his higher studies in United States of America and in England. And secondly, Another important influence on Ambedkar was the influence of Dewey, John Dewey, and the entire pragmatic school of philosophy, which was quite popular in United States of America. So, pragmatism and Dewey, particularly his ideas and his thought on democracy, were of lasting consequence for his entire evolution of his political thought. And the third important influence was basically the philosophy of Buddhism, because later on, as we will see, that he converted to Buddhism, and after a very detailed and comparative study of different religions, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Sikhism, and so on and so forth, and he came to this conclusion that Buddhism perhaps offers the best emancipatory route for human beings, and therefore he converted to Buddhism. And not only that, he also started writing a book on Buddhism, Buddha and his Dhamma, which was published only after his death. So, therefore, we find that these were some of the influences on Ambedkar. Now, of course, when one turns one's eye to the work which he did throughout his life, we find that there were three different directions in which it proceeded. One was the awakening and organizing the depressed classes, that is untouchable sections of the society for whom he spoke initially. The second was participation in the British government and its institutions, including the Viceroy Executive Council. And the third was encouraging education by founding colleges, schools, actively admonishing his followers and oppressed sections to take to education, because three slogans he gave: organize, educate, and agitate. That first you organize yourself, then you educate, and then you agitate for your rights. So, this was the slogan he gave in his life. So, education was an important tool for Ambedkar for emancipation. So, therefore, we find that initially till 1935 particularly, his entire engagement was three-pronged. The first, awakening and organizing. Number two, participation in the British institutions, British government's initiatives, including the franchise committee like Southborough Committee, Simon Commission, Round Table Conference. He participated in all of them and basically espoused the cause of the depressed classes. And number two, he took to education as a route for emancipation and popularized it, because he thought that education is the only channel through which human beings can attain liberation. So, therefore, these three directions one can find till 1935. After 1935, he takes to a different, related but a different type of politics, that is contesting elections, joining legislatures, fighting for the rights, writing books on, like states and minorities, particularly the scheduled castes were considered minorities then, and therefore, what is the best possible safeguard for them, and then joining the Constituent Assembly, and later on becoming minister and also resigning, and the last phase, as I have mentioned, that he took to a different type of thinking, that was conversion to Buddhism. So, this is how one finds that the different directions in which his work moved. Thank you. About B.R. Ambedkar, Bhimrao Ambedkar's political thought, we have to remember that it evolved through number of phases, and not only phases but different types of engagements he had in his life, from struggle to lawmaking to pure thinking, abstract thinking, as well as concrete application of that thinking. So therefore, he was a multifaceted personality of modern India. Now, in fact, till 1935, one should remember that his entire work was directed towards organizing people, struggling for their rights, and then not only that, but also working for education of the people, and creating awareness and awakening among the people through active participation with the institutional frame of the colonial state, and also wanted to take advantage of whatever the benefits which the Britishers were giving to the oppressed section, like the depressed classes through franchise committees like Southborough, Simon Commission, and the Round Table Conference. So active participation in all that, along with his effort for popularizing education among the oppressed sections. But all these measures had a kind of impact on his political thought, and initially we find that to some extent it continued till the end, was the issue of representation, that who can represent the oppressed sections in society, who can represent the untouchables in society. And it was on this issue that Ambedkar and Gandhi had a face-off in 1931, the second Round Table Conference as well, because Gandhi claimed that Congress and Gandhi could speak for whole of India, because India was a nation and the interests of all the sections were telescoped into this nation, and therefore Gandhi and Congress had a right to speak for them, which was challenged by Ambedkar. And Ambedkar argued that only untouchables could speak for the untouchables in India. Other sections didn't have any legitimacy or moral right to speak for them. So this question, that who should represent the oppressed sections, whether untouchables could be represented by other sections, continued with him till the end. And this dilemma, even in a democracy, because initially he argued for separate electorates, a provision which was introduced by Britishers for minorities like Muslims, and later on it was extended to Christians, Anglo-Indians, Sikhs, and in 1932 this what is known as Communal Award or MacDonald Award, it was extended to the depressed classes also. And it was on this issue that Gandhi, who was in Yarda jail, went on fast unto death, and after that there was a pact between Gandhi and Ambedkar known as Pune Pact, where the separate electorates was turned down, but seats for the depressed classes were reserved, and a different framework emerged. So that was the kind of understanding he reached. But he continued to argue for separate electorates till the time he was in the Constituent Assembly, particularly as a chairman of the drafting committee, when the Constituent Assembly dropped this provision, the separate electorates prevalent earlier during the colonial rule, and instead went for a reservation of seats for other depressed classes, who after 1935 were called the scheduled caste, as they were part of a schedule for this benefits of 1935 Act. So therefore, this was the only phase we find that he dropped this separate electorate demand from his charter, which was there when he presented that famous book called or writing States and Minorities in 1947. We will look at some of his writings including that. But later on we find that after 1951, again he started believing that in the kind of democracy which is prevalent here, the kind of inequality which is prevalent here, and he often called it graded inequality, that there is a division of labor in all societies, but what is unique and specific to India is that there is also division among laborers on basis of caste system. So therefore, this unique and specific feature of Indian society does not allow the kind of liberal democratic process which is there in the Western liberal democracies to work and operate smoothly. And therefore, certain exceptions have to be made, and that exceptionalism in his opinion was this provision of separate electorates, because there was not, because in liberal democracies normally you have a concept of majority and minority, and he argued that that minority and majority is basically the political majority and minority. But in India, unfortunately, in his opinion, this majority and minority was a communal majority and minority which doesn't change due to politics and elections, and therefore this communal minority and communal majority, particularly the majority, has a veto, and therefore certain new mechanisms have to be there, and separate electorate, therefore he believed that could be one. So therefore this way we find that this entire thing, this impact, these struggles, these experiences had on his thought, led him to believe on certain things which kept on changing, but still they were consistent, but including that only untouchables could represent untouchables, in spite of the fact that if you look at the larger canvas of his political thought, one finds that his entire quest for emancipation was universal in nature. But he argued that in order to attain that universal identity of citizenship, this unfortunate and regrettable path, certain oppressed sections have to take to reach that goal, that is the universal emancipation and citizenship, modern citizenship identity. And that was basically how he argued for separate electorates, because what he argued often, that particularly in context of Muslims demand for separate electorates, when he compared depressed classes and the Muslims demand, he believed that what Muslims in India at that time, in the colonial context before partition, what they faced, the problem they faced was the problem of valuability, not visibility, because their number was less, therefore they could not, they didn't enjoy the same value as a value of their votes as perhaps the majority sections enjoyed, majority religion enjoyed. But he argued that the depressed classes had another problem as well. Along with this valuability, they also faced the problem of visibility. So visibility and valuability, the two problems which the depressed classes faced, and therefore it put them in a very different situation than the minorities like Muslims and Christians, or for that matter any other religious group. Therefore, how to get this visibility first? And he thought that separate electorates perhaps would enable them to get this visibility, and once that visibility comes, then perhaps the value of their vote could also be counted. So therefore, this was his argument initially. So in fact, one looks at this entire trajectory, one can say that his entire thing was, of course, for the annihilation of caste. This is the book which he also wrote in 1936. But this annihilation, how to attain this annihilation? And therefore, perhaps if one reads his political thought closely, then it appears that he was for reification, that is, first off, separate electorates to reify this identity, because they will again be bracketed as untouchables or depressed classes or the scheduled caste. But once it is reified, then the value and visibility both will come. One reification is happening, then what will happen, that transcendence, transcendence would be possible, that then they can transcend this identity for a different identity, that is citizenship identity. And when transcendence is attained, then one can say that this annihilation would be possible, that entire caste system would be annihilated. So therefore, reification, transcendence and annihilation, the three stages for emancipation he suggested, and therefore he was not perhaps quite comfortable with this concept of separate electorates, but the context of caste system and Indian society forced him to think in terms of separate electorates, because he thought without reification, transcendence would not happen, and without transcendence, this annihilation would not be possible. So therefore, we find that this is how entire experience, struggles, movements influenced his thought so far as his entire emancipatory project is concerned. But the mission, overall mission of equality attaining or gaining equality in Hindu social order. Particularly initially he started temple entry movement, and particularly when he also tried that these sections should participate in popular Ganpat festival, because the untouchability practice has to be defied and decried and has to be basically fought against. So therefore all these three things were part of his initial phase of struggle and movements. But one interesting thing, before we come to writings, one important, the two turning points in his entire life. The first turning point is the Mahad Satyagraha. The Mahad Satyagraha, which is very significant in his life, his struggle in the evolution of his political thought. And the second is RTC, that is Round Table Conferences, because there he put before the larger world, particularly put before the different sections, different political states, different political opinions, different political groups of India, as well as the colonial rulers, the position which he championed and espoused. So therefore this Mahad Satyagraha and Round Table Conference are two important moments. Mahad Satyagraha of 1927 and Round Table Conference 30, 31 and 32, three conferences, and he was one person who attended all three. Now of course both Mahad and Round Table Conference were turning point in terms of the evolution of his political thought, but still two issues can be found quite consistent in both of them. One, his espousal of parliamentary democracy, and second, his quest for legal redressal of the grievances, law and constitution, which he continued to believe till the end, that perhaps that would be the best way in modern settings to attain one's objective. Now this Mahad Conference is also to be remembered, that was part of his struggle for equality in Indian society. Now of course what happened in Mahad, a place near Nasik, that an informal conference of the depressed classes was convened. It was in response to the bold resolution of Bombay legislature, which decided to throw open all public places to different sections, including the untouchables. Now it was basically meant for entry of these sections into the pond for water, which was at times was not allowed, and therefore to drink water from the pond was the main purpose for for this satyagraha or this struggle, Mahad struggle or Mahad conference, as a result of this famous legislation of the Bombay Legislative Assembly. Now what happens, that this led to violence, and therefore a retreat happened, but it was not going to stop there. The second conference was again convened in 1927, and that became significant because it was around that time that Manu Smriti was burned, and he gave the slogan to basically defy the rules of the caste system. So therefore, in fact, what happened, that he didn't leave this matter there. He took this issue to court and finally won a legal victory. So therefore, this Mahad had a lasting impact on his thought, on his actions, on his mind, that how law could get him the victory in the court, but at the same time the kind of awareness and sensitivity it developed, the kind of criticism which he started offering to the caste system. Of course, that began as a student in Columbia. We will come to that when he wrote a paper on the caste system, that was a very significant piece of writing from a student in Columbia University who had experienced this operation firsthand, and try to understand and explain the origin of the caste system in India. Because those days the theory which was most commonly argued or prevalent was the Aryan theory, that when Aryans invaded this part of the world, those who were not Aryans were basically turned into slaves or were basically turned into untouchables. So racial theory of caste, and Ambedkar moved beyond that racial theory, and this is what becomes very interesting. We will see that how he did it. Now the second important event, as I was mentioning as a turning point, was the Round Table Conference. Here we find that he had that famous debate with Gandhi on the question of the caste system, on the question of separate electorates, because Gandhi opposed separate electorates for the depressed classes. The argument of Gandhi was very clear. He argued that with separate electorates, Muslims should remain Muslims, Christians should remain Christians. But what is the problem of this section, the depressed classes, that they are part of the Hindu social order, but they have gone outside it largely due to a very inhuman practice that is called untouchability, and therefore it is a question of reforming this religion, but they are part of the Hindu social order unlike Muslims and the Christians. Therefore separate electorates would alienate them, and it will not allow any reform in this religion. Therefore we have to keep them within the Hindu fold, and then we have to fight for this reform for eradication of untouchability. Ambedkar's argument was different. He believed that for 5 years, if the untouchables and the caste Hindus, they do not interact, if they don't dine together, if they don't intermarry, how come only after 5 years during elections, if they vote together, will unite them? So therefore this unity will have no basis, but the separate electorates would accrue other benefits to this section, as I mentioned earlier, the visibility and valuability. And secondly, Gandhi believed that the caste system is a distorted version of Varnashram principle, the 4 Varnas, which is basically duty based division of society. But Ambedkar believed that a caste and a Varna both are related to each other. One cannot fight caste system by retaining Varna system. So these two fundamental differences led to this divergence in their perception and opinion on the high table of that negotiation in London in front of the British Prime Minister. And it is to be remembered that after this face-off, the 1931 Round Table Conference, that the British Prime Minister came with that Communal Award in 1932 known as MacDonald Award, against which Gandhi went on to fast unto death in Yarbada jail, and finally this Pune Pact was signed between Ambedkar and Gandhi, because there was a fear that Gandhi's life may be in danger. So this is how these two things had a great role in the evolution of Ambedkar's political thought, because later on, of course, Ambedkar wrote a book also, What Congress and Gandhi have done to the untouchables, because he became a bitter critique of both due to this experience in the second Round Table Conference. But that apart, what we find that these turning points are important. Of course, later on we'll see that how he came to analyze the caste system, which was very important in his political thought, because the entire discourse of emancipation and liberation about people, oppressed sections in India, came to this issue of caste, because he believed that it was a India specific arrangement or system. And that's why I mentioned earlier that he believed that division of labor is common in all civilizations, in all societies. There is nothing new in it. But what is unique in India is not division of labor, but division among laborers. And therefore the kind of graded inequality which he often pointed out is the feature of this caste system. So therefore, in fact, he started analyzing these things as a student, in earlier stages of his evolution. And in fact, if we turn to the writings, it becomes quite clear, because the first important writing which he produced was Caste in India, Mechanism, Genesis and Development. And this piece he wrote as a student in Columbia. It was in form of a paper. Later on it was published as a book, and many people believe that it is one of the finest argument or finest analysis of India's caste system. The second important piece of writing on caste is the Annihilation of Caste, written in 1936, and of course that is also quite significant, this annihilation of caste, because this was his mission in life, to annihilate it. But as I mentioned, that he believed that for annihilating caste one has to refine it, transcend it, and then only one can annihilate. The third important piece of writing, of course, the question of untouchability troubled him from the very beginning, but the academic piece which he produced was only in 1948. That was Untouchables, Who Are They, Why They Became Untouchables. And then 1947, when the Constituent Assembly was convened, he, as a champion of the rights of the scheduled castes who were demanding the status of a minority, because as I mentioned, that minority was the only legitimate category in the eyes of the colonial rule, and therefore the piece which he produced, the book which he wrote, was States and Minorities. This is another significant piece of writing where he presents in elaborate detail all the measures which are required for the protection of depressed classes, the scheduled castes, including separate villages, state ownership of industries, agriculture getting the status of industries, a centralized government, parliamentary form of government, separate electorates, all the measures which he argued, from the beginning to the end, in fact, find mention in this book. And finally, his last piece of writing, which is highly philosophical, that is Buddha and his Dhamma. It is a discourse on Buddhism, which was published in 1957 after his death, but he completed around the time he died in 1956. So these are some of the writings through which one gets the idea of Ambedkar's political thought. Now this also shows that how prolific he was, in spite of the fact that he was actively participating in struggles, in movements, completely, continuously reflecting on the important political events, the social events of his time, including the demand of partition. When it came from the Muslim League, he also reflected on it and produced a piece of writing on partition of India, Pakistan and demand for partition of India. Later on, as member of Rajya Sabha, when the linguistic states were carved out, he also produced a piece of writing on the linguistic states, where he believed that this State Reorganization Commission had committed a mistake by creating states of different size, and therefore he argued that it amounted to balkanizing the southern states and consolidating the northern one. And he suggested measures to rectify it. He wanted not one state, one language formula, but one language, one state formula. That the linguistic basis of a state he justified, but the manner and the procedure which he suggested was different from what was argued by this State Reorganization Commission. In fact, he concurred with K.M. Panikkar also, who had given a dissenting note on this thing. So therefore, what I am trying to argue, that he was a prolific writer, reflecting, commenting on all the events, social, political, economic of his time, in spite of his active involvement in struggles and movement. From that one can see the range of his ideas. From that one can see the genius in him. One can see that how a person of his caliber, who rose from such a modest background, through struggles, through by facing oppression and indignity, because he also had to face the indignity in a city like Baroda when he came back from United States after higher study. So therefore, this self-respect was a very important theme in his political thought. So these writings tell you something about that. Not only that, when he started actively participating in political process, he also founded parties, and the three important parties also which he helped founding also tells you that what was the thought pattern of Ambedkar. The first important party which he founded was the Independent Labour Party in 1937, and this Independent Labour Party was interestingly a party of the workers, particularly at that time his entire idea was for socialism, a centrist government and industrialization, state-sponsored industrialization. He wanted to organize the working class in one basically framework. Now, of course, in 1937 he fought the election with this Independent Labour Party. The second important party which he founded was the Scheduled Caste Federation in 1942, and then finally the Republican Party in 1956, just before his death. So therefore, the first and the last, the Labour and the Republican, tells you that he was his thought cannot be reduced to only the identity of a scheduled caste leader or scheduled caste champion or votary of their rights, because he talked of working class and moved in for for the rights of the scheduled caste, and finally a Republican discourse, basically influenced by Abraham Lincoln and thinking in terms of the larger Republican discourse of democracy. So therefore this universal idea of citizenship was perhaps the final phase of his thinking so far as political party is concerned. Of course, the constitution making, we have seen the drafting committee as a chairman, he not only piloted the constitution but as a law minister played important role. Of course, he resigned also 1951 as a law minister, largely due to his disenchantment with the policies which were being pursued, particularly on Hindu Code Bill and so on and so forth. Of course, before his death, the most significant dimension is the conversion to Buddhism. He studied all religions but believed Buddhism to be the religion which is based on morality, not on God. It is based on dignity and self-respect, not on kind of obscurantism and spiritual thinking, and converted to Buddhism. Of course, in conclusion, one can say that he was a great modernist. He believed and basically he cherished modern values and modern institutions. But of course, certain things in modernity he has started questioning, and therefore a lot of scholars argue that was he a rebel or a conformist, or can it be called a modernist rebel against modernity? Because he also started lambasting parliamentary democracy. One of the last speeches which he delivered in Bombay, he said that with parliamentary politics I can become prime minister and president, but that would not help me in attaining my selfhood or my emancipation. So therefore, all these things he has started interrogating, and reformist and revolutionary, he was definitely a revolutionary, but of course his method of revolution was different, through law, through reform, through constitution. I will stop here.
With this note, thank you, sir. Thank you so very much. And dear friends, we believe that you might have liked today's lecture. For your feedback, keep giving it on info.cc@nic.in. We would be meeting again very soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much.